This is the 5-minute guide to the South Dakota class battleships of the United States Navy.
The South Dakota class were the first American battleships built to treaty agreements to be armed with 16-inch guns. The preceding North Carolina class had actually been designed with quadruple 14-inch guns, like the King George V's, but since the design was less advanced when the escalator clause of the treaty was invoked, they were redesigned with 16-inch guns. A previous design in the 1920s had also been named the South Dakota class, but had been cancelled under the Washington Naval Treaty. The class comprised 4 ships: South Dakota, Indiana, Massachusetts, and Alabama. The designers were able to correct a variety of design flaws in the North Carolina class, so the ship had better armor, better engines, and better underwater protection, at least in theory, than the older design. Additionally, to allow the ships to be used as flagships, an extra deck was included in the superstructure, although this meant the loss of a couple of secondary battery mounts in the South Dakota itself. The ships were originally supposed to be a pair of repeat North Carolinas, but thanks to the Navy arguing a better design could be built and the deteriorating situation in Europe, 4 ships of the new design began construction in 1939 instead. The ship's armor protection was very complex, because the 16-inch guns could penetrate even the thickest plate on existing American ships. Even at long range, better protection was needed, but the ship still had to keep within the 35,000-ton weight limit. On British ships, the armor was simply increased to the appropriate thickness, but in the South Dakota class it was decided to use inclined armor. This meant that when a shell hit the belt, the total angle of impact would be greater, and so the apparent thickness of the armor would be increased, which in theory would give the needed protection against long-range fire, whilst only needing armor that was just over 12 inches thick. However, because the angle of impact reduced as the range closed, this meant the ships would be under-protected in close-range engagements. There were other issues with the concept as well. If the ship was damaged, the external plating and possibly framing would have to be cut away to repair the armor, even if the armor had stopped the shell. It also meant that a torpedo could flood a good portion of the ship's displacement volume without breaching the armor belt. All of these issues arose because of the need to keep the ship armed with 16-inch weapons while staying within the confines of the 35,000-ton weight limit. The deck armor was made up of several layers at different levels that gave good overall protection, although later lessons showed that a single, thicker deck was more effective. With all this additional weight for guns and armor, the ship was made shorter to keep the overall weight down, and within the limit, but because a longer ship can generally move faster for a given amount of power, the engines were made considerably more powerful to allow the ships to maintain their 27-knot top speed. Their shorter length also meant the ships were relatively maneuverable as far as battleships went. The main battery was considerably less problematic, consisting of 9 16-inch guns in 3 triple turrets, arranged in a super-firing pair forward, with a third turret mounted aft of the main superstructure. The secondary battery consisted of 16 5-inch 38 caliber dual-purpose guns in 8 twin turrets, 4 on either side of the superstructure in South Dakota, and in 10 twin turrets with 20 guns, 5 on either side of the ship, in all other ships of the class. The anti-aircraft battery changed over time. At first the ships were designed to mount 12 50 caliber machine guns and 12 1.1-inch cannon. By March 1942, when South Dakota was completed, the anti-aircraft battery was modified to 8 50 caliber machine guns and 28 1.1-inch and 16 20mm Oerlikon autocannon. By September, 50 caliber machine guns had been removed and the number of 1.1-inch guns had been reduced to 20. In their place, more 20mm guns were added, and 16 Bofors 40mm guns in 4 quadruple mounts were installed. In February 1943, the 1.1-inch guns and one of the 20mm were replaced by an additional 52 40mm guns, for a total of 68, and in December 1944 the battery was again upgraded to a total of 72 20mm and 72 40mm guns. In March 1945, the battery would be modified for the last time, 5 20mm added and 4 40mm removed. This provided the maximum number of anti-aircraft guns at 145 barrels. The other 3 ships followed a similar pattern of upgrades to the anti-aircraft armament. The South Dakotas were eventually equipped with both air and surface search radars and radar fire control, starting out with air search radar and having new systems installed over time as they became available, including the excellent Mark 37 anti-aircraft fire director. The 4 ships all had active careers, which can be covered in detail separately upon viewer request, as Massachusetts has been covered today. But briefly, South Dakota spent her active career in the Pacific, being present for a number of major battles, but also suffering total electrical failure in a night battle with the Congo-class Kirishima, suffering extensive damage to the superstructure, before being rescued by her immediate predecessor, the USS Washington. The Indiana also spent its career in the Pacific, escaping major damage from numerous Japanese attacks but needing extensive repairs after being rammed by the USS Washington, surprisingly enough, during the invasion of the Marshall Islands. The Massachusetts, on the other hand, first saw action taking part in the Allied landings on the western end of North Africa in Operation Torch, where she was engaged by French shore batteries and other American warships were attacked by the incomplete French battleship Jean Bart. She disabled the French ship with a number of hits, although an incoming shell managed to penetrate her deck armour and start a small fire. After this, she received a small refit and spent the rest of her time in the Pacific. The Alabama started her active service with the British Home Fleet, escorting Arctic convoys to the Soviet Union. After a few months of this, she was likewise sent to the Pacific, where, amongst other things, one of her 5-inch turrets accidentally fired into the back of another whilst trying to shoot down Japanese aircraft. The whole class would be placed in reserve in 1947, as the US Navy had more than enough modern battleships, and decommissioned in 1962. Whilst South Dakota and Indiana were sold for scrap, Alabama and Massachusetts were turned into museum ships and can still be visited today.
That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a comment or a favorite ship to review, or would like to hear more about a specific South Dakota class battleship, let us know in the comments below.